The alarm in my headset screamed before I even understood what I had done. My name is Nathan Price, and 3 seconds ago I was just a tired translator sitting alone in a cold storage room on Station Kesserin, staring at a cracked data core that everyone else had thrown away. Now every light in the room had turned red, and the floor beneath my chair was humming like it was alive. I had not touched a weapon. I had not pressed a single dangerous button. All I did was speak 4 words out loud, words I had spent 6 months rebuilding from broken fragments of a language that every alien scholar in the galaxy had called dead. And yet here I was, gripping the edge of my desk, watching my own hands shake, because somewhere far beyond this station, something enormous had just opened its eyes. Let me take you back a little, because you need to understand how a nobody like me ended up here. Humanity had only been part of the Galactic Assembly for 11 years. To the other species, we were children. The Velmar had cities older than our entire written history. The Threll had explored more star systems in 1 century than we had visited in our whole existence. When I applied for a position at the Galactic Archive Authority, I was rejected 4 times before someone finally gave me a job nobody else wanted, cataloging corrupted data cores recovered from ruins too old for anyone to properly date. It was the kind of work that made your eyes hurt and your mind numb. Most cores were empty, damaged beyond recovery, filled with static that even the smartest translation systems could not decode. My supervisor, a stern Velmar woman named Aura Vesson, gave me a box of these cores with a tired sigh and said, "If you find anything useful in these, I will personally recommend you for early retirement." She meant it as a joke. I did not take it as one. For weeks, I sat in a small room with gray walls, running failed core after failed core through every scanner we had. Most of my colleagues laughed at the idea that a human, barely a few years into interstellar life, could find something that entire teams of experienced alien linguists had missed. I ignored them. I had always been the type of person who noticed patterns others overlooked, even as a child. My mother used to say I could hear music in silence. Then came core number 217. It was small, dull gray, with a strange texture unlike any material I had touched before. The scanning system labeled it unreadable, non-standard structure, recommend disposal. I almost placed it in the disposal bin with the others, but something about the pattern of tiny grooves on its surface caught my eye. They were not random. They repeated in a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. I brought it back to my desk and ran a private analysis, ignoring station protocol that said unidentified cores had to be reported before individual study. I told myself I would report it later, once I understood what I was looking at. That was my first mistake, though at the time it felt like curiosity, not defiance. Days turned into weeks. I built a private algorithm at night, using old human tonal language structures as a comparison model, something no alien researcher had ever considered because our languages were seen as too simple to be useful. But the rhythm in the core matched patterns found in ancient human chant structures, patterns of stress and pitch that could carry meaning far beyond simple words. The first time I heard a partial reconstruction of the sound layer, my whole body went cold. It was not garbled noise. It was language, a structured, deliberate, ancient language, built with a purpose so precise that it did not read like communication between people. It read like a command system, something meant to instruct rather than converse. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the dark, replaying the sound over and over, feeling both terrified and thrilled at the same time, because I finally understood something no one else in the galaxy did. The next morning, I made the decision that would change everything. I requested private access to the Deep Archive server, claiming I needed additional reference material for a routine report. Aura Vesson approved it without asking questions, because she still thought of me as harmless. For the following months, I worked obsessively. I ignored invitations from friends, skipped meals, stopped answering messages from my sister back on Earth. I built partial vocabulary, then partial grammar, piecing together a language so old that even its name had been lost. I called it, privately, the Silent Tongue, because every historical record connected to it had been wiped clean, as if someone, long ago, wanted it forgotten completely. I found references to it buried in footnotes of ancient Velmar texts, dismissed as superstition. Old stories spoke of a voice that could wake sleeping giants, a phrase historians treated as myth, nothing more than a bedtime story meant to frighten children. But myths do not usually come with mathematically precise phonetic structures. Myths do not have grammar rules hidden inside their rhythm. By the 6th month, I had reconstructed enough of the language to attempt something reckless, a direct vocal test. Not written translation, not theoretical modeling, but actual pronunciation, using the tonal patterns I had rebuilt from scratch. I knew this was against every research protocol. Direct activation attempts on unidentified ancient technology were strictly forbidden, without full committee approval, especially involving a data core with unknown properties. But by that point, I was no longer thinking like a careful researcher. I was thinking like someone who had found the answer to a question the entire galaxy had given up asking. That evening, alone in my office, I sat with the core resting on my desk, its dull surface faintly warm under the light. I told myself I would only test a single phrase, the smallest fragment I had verified with the highest confidence, just to see if my theory was correct, just to prove I was not imagining things. I took a slow breath, feeling my heart pound against my ribs, and spoke the 4 reconstructed syllables aloud. For a moment, nothing happened. I almost laughed, half from relief, half from disappointment, thinking I had wasted 6 months chasing a fantasy. Then the core began to glow. Not brightly, not dramatically, but with a soft pulse of pale light that seemed to sync perfectly with my own heartbeat, as if it were listening, as if it recognized me. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that I saw my own breath in the air. The station's ambient hum, always present in the background, seemed to fade into complete silence, as though the entire structure was holding its breath along with me. Then every alarm in the building went off at once. Red light flooded the room. My comm device buzzed violently against my wrist, flashing emergency codes I had never seen before. Through the thin wall, I heard distant shouting, footsteps running, doors slamming. I sat frozen, staring at the glowing core, realizing with growing horror that I had not simply confirmed a linguistic theory. I had triggered something real. My door burst open moments later, and Aura Vesson stood there, her usually calm expression replaced with something I had never seen on her face before: fear. "What did you do?" she said, her voice trembling, not as an accusation, but as a genuine, desperate question. I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out, because in that instant, station-wide alerts began broadcasting information that made my blood run cold. Long-range sensors across 3 neighboring systems had detected a massive, previously unknown energy signature awakening in a sector of space marked, in old galactic records, as permanently restricted. The coordinates matched a location referenced deep within the core's corrupted data, a location I had dismissed earlier as meaningless numerical noise. Aura grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door, shouting orders into her communicator that I barely understood in my state of shock. Around us, the station shifted into full emergency protocol, lights flashing, automated voices repeating warnings in multiple alien languages at once. I looked back one last time at the small gray core still glowing faintly on my desk, and a strange, impossible thought settled into my mind, one that terrified me more than any alarm or flashing light ever could. I had not just translated a lost language. I had spoken to something that had been sleeping for longer than any civilization currently alive could remember, and somewhere out there, across the black expanse of space, it had just heard me and answered. The corridor outside my office had turned into complete chaos. Alien officers from at least 6 different species rushed past me, shouting orders in overlapping languages, their translators struggling to keep up. Aura Vesson gripped my arm so tightly it almost hurt, pulling me toward the central command deck instead of letting me disappear into the crowd like I desperately wanted to. "You are not going anywhere," she said, her voice sharp, despite the fear still trembling underneath it. "Whatever you did, You are going to explain it to people far more important than me." I wanted to argue, but honestly, what could I say? I had broken protocol, triggered an unknown ancient system, and now half the sector was in a state of emergency because of 4 words I had whispered alone in a quiet room. There was no version of this conversation where I came out looking innocent. The command deck was worse than the corridor. Screens covered every wall, showing star maps, energy readings, and a flashing red marker over a region of space labeled, in bold galactic standard text, Restricted Zone 7. I had seen that label before in old historical footnotes, always accompanied by warnings that no ship had ever survived entering that sector, warnings so old that most scholars assumed they were exaggerated stories meant to scare cadets. A tall Threll officer named Doran Keth stood at the center of the room, his 4 eyes scanning multiple monitors at once, his translator device clipped to his collar buzzing with strain from the volume of communication happening around him. "Explain," he said the moment he noticed me, his tone flat, but heavy, with barely controlled anger. "Explain why an unregistered human research assistant activated a Class 0 artifact without any authorization." I opened my mouth, and to my surprise, actual words came out this time, though my voice shook. "I did not know it would do this," I said. "I was reconstructing an old language from a data core marked as unreadable. I tested a small phrase to confirm my theory. I did not expect any physical reaction. You do not simply test ancient command language without expecting consequences," Doran snapped, stepping closer, his presence intimidating even through a screen filled with panic. "Do you understand what has happened? An energy signature the size of a small moon has just activated inside a zone every civilization has avoided for over 10,000 years. Ships sent there in the past never returned." My stomach dropped. Nobody had told me this was a graveyard for ships. Nobody had told me this location carried actual historical warnings beyond dismissed folklore. Before I could respond, another voice entered the conversation, calmer, more measured, belonging to a Velmar diplomat named Isla Wren, someone I recognized from council broadcasts but had never actually spoken to in person. She walked in with quiet authority, her presence immediately shifting the tension in the room. "Enough shouting," she said firmly. "Panic will not help us understand what we are dealing with. Nathan Price, is it?" I nodded, surprised she knew my name at all. "Tell me exactly what you discovered," she continued, her tone steady, almost gentle compared to Doran's aggressive questioning. "Not what you fear happened, what you actually found in your research." I took a breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts, and explained everything as clearly as I could. I described the core, the strange rhythmic pattern in its structure, my private theory connecting it to old human tonal language models, the months of reconstruction work, and finally, the single test phrase I had spoken. Isla listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable, while Doran paced behind her, clearly struggling to contain his frustration. When I finished, silence filled the room for a long moment. "This language," Isla finally said, "do you have a name for it?" "I called it the silent tongue," I admitted, feeling slightly foolish saying it aloud in front of officials. Because every historical reference to it had been deliberately erased. It felt like something meant to stay forgotten. Doran let out a short, humorless laugh. "Forgotten for good reason, apparently." Isla raised a hand, silencing him without even looking his way. "There are old records," she said slowly, "buried deep within Velmar historical archives, referencing something similar. Stories dismissed as myth, describing a language capable of commanding ancient constructs, built by a civilization whose name has been lost entirely. Most scholars considered it superstition." "And now?" I asked quietly. "Now," she said, glancing toward the massive star map on the main screen, "we may be looking at proof that those old stories were not myths at all." A junior officer rushed into the room at that moment, breathless, holding a data pad with shaking hands. "New readings from the restricted zone," he said. "Multiple large-scale energy signatures. Not just one. We are detecting movement." The room went completely still. "Movement," Doran repeated, his four eyes narrowing. "Define movement." "Ships," the officer said. "Or something shaped like ships. Formations emerging from deep dormancy. Preliminary scans suggest—" He hesitated, checking his data again as though he did not trust his own instruments. "Hundreds of individual vessels, arranged in perfect symmetrical patterns, none of them matching any known design in our historical database." I felt my knees weaken slightly, gripping the edge of a nearby console to steady myself. "This is not possible," Doran muttered, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "No civilization has fleet capacity like that, hidden in a restricted zone, without detection for thousands of years." "No known civilization," Isla corrected quietly, her eyes fixed on the screen. The tension in the room grew heavier with every passing second. More officers rushed in with updated readings, each report more unsettling than the last. The energy signatures were stabilizing, not spreading chaotically, but organizing, as though some invisible structure was guiding them into precise formation. Whatever had awakened out there was not simply reacting randomly, it was preparing for something. "We need immediate council authorization to mobilize defense forces," Doran said, turning toward Isla. "This cannot wait for slow diplomatic procedure." "And if it attacks the moment we send warships toward it," Isla replied sharply, "we will have caused the very disaster we are trying to prevent." Their argument escalated quickly, voices rising, other officers taking sides, the entire room dissolving into overlapping tension. I stood silently in the middle of it all, feeling smaller by the second, painfully aware that none of this would be happening if I had simply followed protocol and reported the core instead of testing it alone. Then something happened that silenced the entire room instantly. The main screen flickered, distorted briefly, and a new signal appeared, faint but unmistakably directed, not broadcast randomly across space, but aimed specifically at Station Kesserin. The junior officer who had brought the earlier update stared at his console, his face pale. "We are receiving a direct transmission," he said slowly, "originating from the restricted zone." "Translated," Doran ordered immediately. The officer's hands moved rapidly across his controls, running the signal through every available translation system. Seconds stretched into what felt like unbearable minutes. Finally, he shook his head. "Our systems cannot process it. The structure does not match any known language pattern." Every eye in the room slowly turned toward me. I felt my mouth go dry. "You reconstructed part of this language," Isla said quietly, though her tone carried the weight of an unspoken request rather than a simple observation. I stared at the screen, at the pulsing, strange signal displayed as raw data, feeling the same mixture of fear and fascination I had felt back in my quiet office, right before everything changed. "I only rebuilt a fragment," I said carefully. "Not the full language. I do not know if I can understand a direct transmission. But you might be the only person in this entire station who has any chance," Doran said, his earlier hostility replaced by something closer to desperate necessity. I looked around the room, at faces filled with fear, confusion, and cautious hope, all directed toward me, someone who, only hours earlier, had been considered barely important enough to catalog broken data cores nobody else wanted to study. Slowly, I stepped toward the console, my heart pounding loud enough that I was certain everyone in the room could hear it. "Play the signal again," I said quietly. "Let me listen." The officer nodded, adjusting the controls, and a strange, layered sound filled the room, rhythmic, deliberate, unmistakably similar to the patterns I had spent months reconstructing alone in my small office. My mind raced, instinctively breaking the sound into familiar structures, recognizing fragments of grammar I had painstakingly rebuilt from nothing but broken data and stubborn curiosity. As the signal continued playing, one phrase repeated with unmistakable clarity, a phrase I somehow understood despite never having encountered it directly in my research. It was a question, not a threat, not an attack warning, not aggressive posturing, a simple, ancient question, waiting patiently across thousands of years for someone capable of answering it. "Who speaks?" I whispered aloud, translating the words slowly, my voice barely audible over the tense silence filling the room. Doran's eyes widened. Isla stepped closer, her expression shifting from cautious hope to something far more serious. "It is asking who woke it," she said quietly. I swallowed hard, staring at the pulsing signal on the screen, fully aware that whatever I said next would determine what happened to this entire sector of space. "It wants an answer," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "and I think it will keep asking until it gets one." The room fell into heavy silence once again, every officer waiting, watching, as the weight of the moment settled fully upon me. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, I understood clearly that there was no way back to the quiet, unimportant life I had before. Whatever happened next, I was no longer simply a translator working in a forgotten corner of the station. I had become the only voice standing between an ancient, awakened fleet and an entire galaxy holding its breath, waiting to see whether my next words would bring peace or something far more dangerous. The council meeting that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Representatives from a dozen species crowded into the largest chamber on Station Kesserin, their voices overlapping in a storm of demands, accusations, and fear. I sat near the center of the room, flanked by Isla Ren on one side and a visibly exhausted Aura Vessin on the other, feeling like a prisoner on trial rather than a translator asked to help. This human triggered an uncontrolled awakening of an unknown fleet, a Threll counselor barked, his 4 eyes fixed accusingly on me. Every historical record we possess about that restricted zone warns of catastrophic consequences. We should have already mobilized every available warship. And I have already explained, Isla replied firmly, that any aggressive movement toward that fleet could be interpreted as an attack, provoking exactly the disaster you claim to want to avoid. "We do not know its intentions," another voice added, this one belonging to a smaller, insect-like representative from a species I did not recognize. "Silence from an ancient, unknown power is far more dangerous than open communication." The arguments continued for what felt like hours, each species pushing its own agenda, some pushing for immediate military response, others insisting on cautious diplomacy, a few quietly suggesting the fleet be left completely alone in hopes it would return to dormancy. Throughout it all, I remained mostly silent, answering direct questions when asked, but otherwise simply absorbing the sheer scale of panic surrounding a discovery I had made entirely by accident. Eventually, Doran Keth stood, silencing the room with his commanding presence. "Regardless of our disagreements," he said, "one fact remains unavoidable. That fleet is asking a direct question, and it appears to be waiting for a response before taking any further action. If we ignore it, we risk provoking exactly the outcome everyone fears." All eyes turned toward me once again. "You are the only person capable of understanding its language," Isla said quietly. "Whether we like it or not, that makes you central to whatever happens next." I felt the weight of every gaze in the room pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to refuse, to insist someone more qualified take over, someone with actual diplomatic training instead of a linguist who had broken protocol out of pure obsession. But another part of me, quieter but stubborn, understood that no one else in this entire assembly could do what I had already started. "I will help," I said finally, my voice steady despite the fear coiled tightly in my chest. "But I need full access to the original core, along with any additional archives related to this language. If I am going to respond, I need to be as accurate as possible. A mistake here could be far worse than silence." The council reluctantly agreed, though not without further arguing over safeguards, oversight committees, and emergency protocols meant to control my involvement. Aura Vessin, surprisingly, became one of my strongest supporters during this process, vouching for my competence despite my earlier reckless behavior, perhaps understanding that punishing me now would accomplish nothing productive. Within hours, I found myself back in a research room, though far larger and more heavily monitored than my previous quiet office. Multiple officials watched my every move as I worked, cross-referencing the reconstructed language against newly unlocked archive material the Velmar had kept sealed for centuries. As I dug deeper, disturbing details began to emerge. The silent tongue was not simply an old language. It was specifically designed as a command structure, built for controlling technology that required verbal activation rather than digital interface, an intentional safeguard against unauthorized access. Whoever built this fleet had wanted only specific, verified voices to control it, meaning simple digital hacking or manual override would never have worked. But there was something else buried within the ancient records, something that made my blood run cold the moment I fully understood it. According to fragmented historical texts, buried deep within forgotten Velmar archives, this fleet had not been built for conquest. It had been built as a defense system, a failsafe, created by an ancient civilization to protect the galaxy from a threat so dangerous that its own name had been deliberately erased from historical memory, similar to how the silent tongue itself had been hidden. The records were incomplete, damaged by time, and possibly intentional destruction, but one phrase repeated consistently across multiple sources, translated roughly as, "Guardians against the ending." I sat back in my chair, staring at the translated fragments, feeling a chill crawl down my spine. If this fleet was truly built as protection against some ancient threat, then waking it might not be the disaster everyone feared. It might be something else entirely, an answer to a danger nobody currently alive even remembered existed. But that possibility carried its own terrifying weight. If such a threat was real, and if it had been forgotten so thoroughly that even ancient civilizations tried to erase its memory, what did that mean for us now, unknowingly standing in its path without any preparation? I brought my findings immediately to Isla and Doran, presenting the translated fragments with as much clarity as I could manage, despite my own uncertainty about their full meaning. "Guardians against the ending," Doran repeated slowly, his earlier hostility replaced by genuine unease. What kind of ending? "I do not know," I admitted honestly. "The records are incomplete, but if I am reading this correctly, this fleet was never meant to attack civilizations like ours. It was built to defend against something far larger, something considered dangerous enough that even mentioning it directly was avoided in historical texts." Isla studied the translated fragments carefully, her expression thoughtful rather than fearful. "If this is accurate," she said slowly, "then our next move becomes even more critical. We are not simply deciding how to handle an ancient fleet. We may be deciding how to respond to a warning system built specifically to alert future generations about a threat they no longer remember." The room fell into heavy silence as everyone absorbed the implications. "There is only one way to know for certain," I said quietly, feeling the enormous weight of what I was about to propose. "I need to respond directly to its question, not through committee approval or careful diplomatic phrasing, but honestly, exactly as it asked." Doran frowned. "That is an enormous risk. Refusing to answer is also a risk," I countered. "Perhaps a greater one. If this fleet was built to identify a real threat, ignoring its attempt at communication could mean losing whatever protection it might offer, right when we might need it most." Isla studied me carefully for a long moment before finally nodding. "Prepare your response," she said, "but understand clearly, Nathan, once you speak to it directly, there may be no controlled way to predict what happens next." I understood the risk completely. And yet, standing at the center of a decision this enormous, I felt something unexpected settle over my fear, a quiet, stubborn determination that had guided me since the very first moment I noticed strange patterns hidden inside a core everyone else had dismissed as broken and useless. Later that night, alone in the research room despite the presence of monitoring officials outside, I prepared to speak once again in the ancient language I had rebuilt from nothing but broken fragments and stubborn curiosity. My hands trembled slightly as I activated the transmission relay connected to the restricted zone, knowing that whatever I said next would be heard not by a committee, not by careful diplomats, but by something that had waited silently across thousands of years for exactly this moment. I took a slow breath, steadying my voice, and spoke clearly into the quiet room. "I speak," I said, using the reconstructed phrase I had translated from its earlier question. "I am the one who called." For a long, terrifying moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched unbearably, broken only by the quiet hum of station machinery and my own uneven breathing. Then the transmission relay flickered, and a new signal arrived, stronger and clearer than before, carrying within it something unmistakable despite the alien structure of its sound. It was not aggression. It was recognition. Slowly, carefully, I began translating the incoming signal, piecing together meaning from patterns I had spent months rebuilding, feeling my heart race with a mixture of fear and overwhelming realization. The fleet was not simply asking who had woken it. It was asking whether the threat it had been built to guard against had returned, and it was waiting, patiently, desperately, for someone to finally answer that question after thousands of years of silent, forgotten vigilance. I stared at the translated words glowing softly on my screen, feeling the full magnitude of what I had stumbled into settle heavily onto my shoulders. Whatever this ancient guardian fleet had been built to protect us from, it clearly believed the danger had never truly disappeared. And now, through nothing more than accidental discovery and stubborn curiosity, I had become the only person capable of understanding what it was trying so desperately to warn us about. The transmission continued, patient and steady, waiting for my response. Around me, station officials watched silently through observation windows, aware that something significant was happening, but unable to understand the language unfolding before them. I closed my eyes briefly, gathering my thoughts, fully aware that my next words would shape not only the immediate crisis surrounding this awakened fleet, but potentially the future safety of every civilization currently unaware of the ancient danger this guardian system had spent millennia silently waiting to confront. Slowly, carefully, I opened my mouth and continued the conversation, becoming, in that single fragile moment, the only bridge between an entire galaxy and a warning system built long before any of us existed, desperately trying to tell us something we had forgotten we ever needed to hear. The days that followed blurred together into an exhausting rhythm of translation, negotiation, and quiet fear. Every conversation I had with the Guardian Intelligence, the entity controlling the awakened fleet, revealed another layer of a story, far older and more complicated than anyone on the Council had expected. I learned to call it Veil, a name I extracted from a recurring pattern in its transmissions, a designation it used for itself, rather than a formal title. Veil was not a single mind in the way I imagined an artificial intelligence might be. It felt more like a preserved consciousness, something built from the memories and intentions of an entire civilization long since gone, condensed into a guiding presence meant to operate the fleet exactly as its original creators intended. Through slow, careful exchanges, often taking hours to properly translate even simple phrases, Veil explained the purpose behind its creation. Long before any current galactic civilization existed, an ancient species, whose name had been deliberately erased even from their own remaining records, encountered a threat capable of erasing entire star systems. Details remained frustratingly vague, either lost to time or intentionally hidden, but the fear embedded within the language itself was unmistakable. This threat had apparently been driven back, contained rather than destroyed, sealed away using methods long forgotten by every current species in the galaxy. The fleet Veil commanded had been built as insurance, a defense system meant to activate the moment this threat attempted to return, using the silent tongue as its only method of activation, specifically to prevent misuse by any civilization not prepared to handle such responsibility. Why erase all memory of this threat, instead of preserving warnings for future generations? I asked Veil during one of our longer exchanges, genuinely confused by the deliberate destruction of such critical information. Veil's response, once translated fully, sent a chill through the entire research room. "Fear spreads faster than wisdom," it replied. "A galaxy consumed by terror destroys itself long before any external threat arrives. Silence was chosen to protect civilizations from themselves, until true necessity required otherwise. I brought this information immediately to the council, watching as different species reacted in vastly different ways. Some officials grew even more anxious, demanding immediate militarization in case this ancient threat truly existed. Others argued the entire situation might be an elaborate test, questioning whether Viel's intentions could be fully trusted despite its seemingly peaceful communication so far. Doran Keth, surprisingly, became one of the strongest advocates for continued dialogue rather than aggressive action. If this fleet intended harm, he said during one heated session, it has had countless opportunities already. Instead, it has only asked questions and waited patiently for answers. That does not match the behavior of a hostile force. Isla Ren remained cautiously supportive throughout, though her focus shifted increasingly toward long-term political consequences rather than immediate safety concerns. Regardless of Vale's true intentions, she said quietly during a private conversation with me, other governments across the galaxy will not simply accept a single human controlling communication with an ancient fleet capable of reshaping entire star systems. Expect pressure, Nathan. Significant pressure. She was right. Within days, representatives from distant governments who had no direct involvement in the initial discovery began sending urgent messages demanding access to my research, insisting that translation authority be transferred to larger, more established scientific bodies rather than remaining solely with an inexperienced human linguist. Some messages were polite requests disguised as diplomatic courtesy. Others were far less subtle, hinting at consequences if I refused to cooperate fully. I found myself caught in an impossible position, pulled between officials who wanted to control the situation entirely and my own growing, undeniable connection with Vale, a connection built not through official protocol, but through months of obsessive personal study long before any of this crisis began. During one tense private meeting, a representative from a distant, powerful government named Corin Hale arrived personally on Station Kesserin, demanding immediate cooperation. "You are a translator, not a diplomat," Corin said bluntly, standing across from me in a small conference room, his expression carrying obvious frustration. "This situation requires structured oversight, not an isolated individual making unilateral decisions." "I understand your concern," I replied carefully, trying to remain calm despite the pressure building inside me. But Vale has only responded consistently to my voice pattern and the specific reconstruction I built. Introducing new translators risks miscommunication at a moment where accuracy matters more than almost anything else. "Or perhaps," Corin said sharply, "it risks exposing exactly how easily manipulated this fleet actually is, considering a single untrained individual triggered its activation entirely by accident." His words stung, though I refused to let my expression show it. Part of me worried he might be right. Perhaps my continued involvement was reckless, dangerous even, considering the enormous stakes involved. But another part of me, the same stubborn instinct that had driven me to reconstruct a supposedly dead language in the first place, refused to back down simply because someone with more political influence demanded control. That night, alone once again in the research room, I opened communication with Vale, uncertain whether I should share my growing personal doubts about my own role in this unfolding situation. Many wished to remove me from this conversation, I admitted honestly, unsure why I felt compelled to be so transparent with an ancient intelligence I barely understood. They believed someone more qualified should speak for them instead. Vile's response came slower than usual, as though carefully considering its words. "Voice matters less than intention," it finally replied. "You did not seek power, you sought understanding. That distinction matters greatly to systems built as I was built." Its words offered strange comfort, though they did little to resolve the mounting political pressure surrounding me. The following morning, the council convened an emergency session, and this time, the pressure to remove me from my role reached its peak. "We cannot allow a single individual, regardless of personal connection, to control communication with a fleet capable of reshaping galactic power," Corin argued forcefully before the assembled representatives. Formal transition of translation authority must happen immediately. Several council members nodded in agreement, clearly persuaded by his argument. I felt my chance slipping away, watching months of careful, obsessive work potentially stripped from me simply because I lacked official diplomatic standing. Then, unexpectedly, sensors throughout the station detected sudden, dramatic changes within the restricted zone. Every representative in the room turned toward the main display, watching as new energy readings appeared, different from anything recorded previously. "What is happening?" Doran demanded immediately. A junior officer, visibly shaken, delivered the update. "Something else is entering the restricted zone," he said. "Unknown signature, approaching rapidly, not matching any previously recorded fleet pattern." The room fell into stunned silence. I felt my stomach twist painfully as realization settled over me. Whatever ancient threat Vale had been built to guard against, whatever danger had been sealed away and deliberately erased from historical memory, it appeared, after thousands of years of dormant silence, to be returning at the worst possible moment, right as political infighting threatened to strip away the only reliable line of communication humanity currently had with the one force potentially capable of confronting it. Isla turned toward me immediately, her expression shifting from cautious diplomacy to urgent necessity. "Nathan," she said firmly, "contact Vale immediately. We need answers, and we need them now." Corin opened his mouth to protest, but even he seemed to understand, watching the escalating readings on the display, that this was no longer the moment for political maneuvering. I moved quickly toward the communication console, my hands trembling slightly as I activated the connection, feeling the enormous weight of the entire room's attention settling onto me once again. "Vale," I said clearly into the quiet room, my voice steady despite the fear building rapidly inside my chest. "Something new has entered the restricted zone. Please, tell us what we are facing." The response arrived almost instantly this time, faster than any previous communication, carrying within its structure something I had not yet heard from Vale throughout our entire exchange. "Urgency." "It has returned," Vale replied, the translated words appearing clearly on my screen, sending a wave of cold dread through the entire room. "Exactly as feared. The ending has come again." I stared at the translated message, my heart pounding painfully against my ribs, fully aware that whatever ancient nightmare this Guardian fleet had been built to confront was no longer a distant historical mystery. It was here, now, in this very moment, and every single person in that room understood, with growing horror, that the small, quiet decision I had made months earlier, alone in a forgotten research office, had somehow placed all of us directly at the center of a conflict, older and more dangerous than any civilization currently alive could fully comprehend. The council chamber erupted into chaos the moment Vale's warning appeared on the main screen. Representatives shouted over one another, some demanding immediate evacuation of nearby systems, others insisting on urgent military mobilization, a few simply staring at the display in stunned silence, unable to process the sudden collapse of thousands of years of uneasy peace. I stood near the communication console, gripping its edge tightly, feeling the weight of the entire room pressing down on me. For the first time since this crisis began, I saw genuine fear in Doran Keth's expression, the confident authority he usually carried, completely replaced by uncertainty. "What exactly is returning?" he asked, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. "Vale must give us more than vague warnings." I relayed the question immediately, my fingers moving quickly across the console, translating as carefully as I could despite the pressure building around me. Vale's response came steadily, though its urgency remained clear within the structure of its language. "A consuming intelligence," it explained, "built long ago by a civilization seeking dominance beyond natural limits. It does not conquer through invasion. It absorbs entire systems, converting matter and energy into extensions of itself. It was contained, not destroyed, sealed within a dormant boundary that has apparently weakened over time." The room fell into horrified silence as I translated Vale's words aloud. "How much time do we have before it reaches inhabited systems?" Isla asked quietly, her earlier calm authority now edged with visible strain. I relayed the question, watching the screen carefully as Vale's response appeared. "Less time than desired," it replied. "My fleet was built specifically to intercept and contain this threat before it reaches populated regions. Immediate coordination is required." Corin Hale, who had spent the past several days arguing aggressively for my removal from this entire situation, now stepped forward with a completely different tone, his earlier hostility replaced by desperate practicality. "Then coordinate with it," he said firmly, looking directly at me. "Whatever authority disputes we have had, they no longer matter. Right now, you are the only person capable of communicating clearly with the one force potentially able to stop this." I felt a strange mixture of vindication and overwhelming responsibility settle over me simultaneously. Months earlier, I had been an overlooked researcher assigned tasks nobody else wanted. Now, in this single unbearable moment, an entire galaxy's safety rested partially on my ability to accurately translate ancient words between species who had never even properly agreed on basic diplomatic terms. "Vale," I said clearly into the console, steadying my voice despite the storm of emotions building inside me. "Tell us exactly what you need from us to intercept this threat successfully." The response arrived methodically, almost as though Vale had anticipated this exact request long before receiving it. "Coordination," it explained. "My fleet requires precise positioning data regarding current civilian population centers to avoid unnecessary casualties during interception. Additionally, direct verbal confirmation is required from the one who reactivated me, authorizing full engagement protocols." I stared at the translated message, feeling my chest tighten painfully. "It needs my direct authorization," I said quietly, turning toward the assembled council. "Not the council's approval, mine specifically." The room erupted into fresh argument almost immediately, some officials insisting such authority could not rest solely with an individual, others recognizing, with growing desperation, that time constraints left no room for extended debate. Ela raised her hand firmly, silencing the chamber. "We do not have time to argue jurisdiction," she said sharply. "Nathan has been the verified point of contact throughout this entire situation. If Vale requires his direct authorization, then we allow it, immediately." Doran, despite his earlier reservations, nodded in reluctant agreement. Even Corin, visibly uncomfortable with the situation, offered no further objection. I turned back toward the console, my hands trembling slightly, fully aware that whatever I said next would set in motion consequences far beyond anything I could fully predict. "Vale," I said, steadying my breathing as best I could, "relay updated population data immediately to the coordinates I am now sending you." I worked quickly alongside station officers, transmitting verified civilian population information across multiple systems, watching as Vale's fleet began adjusting its formation based on the incoming data, moving with precise, calculated efficiency unlike anything I had witnessed from any modern military force. "Population data received and integrated," Vale confirmed. "Interception course calculated, awaiting final authorization." I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the enormous weight of the moment settle fully onto my shoulders. This was not a simple translation exercise anymore. This was a decision that would determine whether an ancient defense system engaged a threat capable of consuming entire star systems, or whether hesitation allowed that same threat to reach innocent civilians completely unprepared for what was coming. I opened my eyes, steadied my voice, and spoke clearly into the console. "Authorization confirmed," I said, using the exact reconstructed phrase required to activate full engagement protocols. "Proceed with interception. Protect what remains." For a long, tense moment, nothing happened on the display. Then, slowly, the massive formation of ancient vessels within the restricted zone began moving, their perfect symmetrical patterns shifting smoothly into an entirely new configuration, aligning directly toward the approaching threat detected at the edge of monitored space. The entire council chamber watched in stunned silence as sensor readings displayed the fleet's movement, thousands of individual vessels advancing with a level of coordinated precision that made even experienced military officers visibly uneasy. Hours passed in tense uncertainty as updates trickled in slowly, each report carrying fragments of information about the unfolding confrontation occurring far beyond direct observation range. I remained close to the communication console throughout, translating every message Vale sent, providing the Council with as much clarity as I could manage, despite my own exhaustion and mounting anxiety. Finally, after what felt like an unbearable eternity, a new transmission arrived, its tone within the translated structure carrying something unmistakable even before I fully processed the words. Relief. Threat contained, Vale reported. Consuming intelligence successfully intercepted and resealed within reinforced dormant boundary. Casualties among monitored civilian population, 0. The council chamber erupted into a mixture of relieved cheering and stunned disbelief. Officials who had spent days arguing bitterly over jurisdiction and authority now stood together, momentarily united by shared exhaustion and overwhelming gratitude. I sat back slowly in my chair, feeling the enormous tension that had built inside me for days finally begin to release, replaced by a strange, quiet numbness as the full reality of everything that had happened settled fully into my mind. In the days that followed, the political landscape shifted dramatically. Humanity, once dismissed as a minor, inexperienced species within the greater galactic community, suddenly found itself holding unprecedented influence, largely due to my unexpected connection with Vale and the ancient Guardian fleet, now recognized publicly as one of the most powerful defensive forces in known space. Council representatives who had previously argued for my removal now approached me with newfound respect, some even requesting formal partnership agreements between their governments and my ongoing communication efforts with Vale. Corin Hale, surprisingly, became one of the strongest advocates for establishing official human oversight regarding future interactions with the fleet, a complete reversal from his earlier aggressive opposition. Isla Wren, calm and composed as always, approached me privately during a quiet moment following the final council session. "You understand," she said softly, "that your life has changed permanently. You are no longer simply a translator, Nathan. You are now humanity's only verified connection to one of the most significant discoveries in recent galactic history." I nodded slowly, still absorbing the full weight of everything that had unfolded over the past several days. I only wanted to understand a language nobody else could read, I admitted honestly. I never expected any of this. "Perhaps that is exactly why it worked," she replied with a faint, knowing smile. Vale did not respond to ambition or authority. It responded to genuine curiosity and patience, qualities far rarer than raw power throughout this entire galaxy. Later that evening, alone once again in the same quiet research room where everything first began, I opened one final private communication with Vale, feeling a strange personal connection I had not expected to develop with an ancient guardian intelligence built by a civilization long since vanished. "What happens now?" I asked quietly, uncertain exactly what future awaited either of us following such an enormous, unexpected confrontation. Vale's response arrived calmly, carrying within its translated structure a sense of quiet purpose rather than uncertainty. "I remain," it said simply, "watching, waiting, as I have always done. But now, for the first time in countless years, I am no longer silent. I have a voice again, through you." I sat quietly for a long moment, staring at the translated words glowing softly on my screen, feeling the full, strange weight of everything that had happened settle finally into something resembling peace rather than fear. I had come to this station as an overlooked researcher, assigned meaningless tasks nobody else wanted to handle. I had broken protocol out of stubborn curiosity, reconstructed a language considered lost forever, and accidentally awakened the most dangerous fleet in the galaxy. But somewhere along the way, through fear, uncertainty, and overwhelming responsibility, I had also become something far more significant than I ever imagined possible. I had become the voice standing between an ancient, forgotten guardian and an entire galaxy that no longer remembered the silent protector still watching carefully over its safety. And as I sat there quietly, staring at the calm, steady presence of Vale's ongoing communication, I understood clearly that this was not the end of an extraordinary, unexpected journey. It was only the beginning of something far greater, something neither Vale nor I could yet fully understand, waiting patiently ahead of us both within the vast, uncertain expanse of the galaxy we now shared together.